maybe you're not anxious. Just hold on, hear me out on this one. Maybe you've just labeled yourself, or social media or emotionally unavailable partners have labeled you as an anxiously attached person. Because I hear this all the time in my counseling office. Someone comes into my office and they say to me, I don't know, I think there's something wrong with me. And then they go on to say, I've been watching a lot of videos and I think I'm just anxiously attached. Plus, my partner keeps telling me that I'm too much and that I'm too needy and that I should really go get some help. And I hear them and I hear you. I hear each and every one of you when you come into my office and you say these things. And I want to gently just challenge that for a second, because sometimes, yes, you are anxiously attached, and that is something that we can work on. But what I've observed and from what I've heard after doing some probing for more information from the client is that maybe for some of you, maybe you're not too much. And maybe in fact, instead of being too much, you're just responding to receiving too little from your partner. So in this video, I want to tackle just that. And this is just part one of 3-part series that I'm making. And in this part, I'm going to explain myself a little bit more here. And then we're going to talk about nervous system mismatch and what that actually means. And I'm also going to share 3 signs to help you tell if you are actually an anxiously attached person, or if you've just been labeled anxiously attached in a relationship where you're with somebody who's possibly just emotionally unavailable or just inconsistent, which is causing you to be anxious. So let me start out just by explaining myself a little bit more here, okay? I'm a counselor. So I fully believe in attachment theory. In fact, I use it every single day with my clients because attachment theory explains so much about why we think the way we think, why we react the way we react, why we do the things that we do, and why relationships can feel so overwhelming to some of us sometimes. But what I've also seen is how people weaponize the concept of attachment theory. How people are using anxious attachment as a label to blame themselves, keeping them stuck in these unhealthy cycles, when what's actually happening is that their responses and their reactions may look like anxious attachment, but it's actually their nervous system that's reacting to a relationship that doesn't feel safe to them. And when that's the case, when your body reacts to a relationship that doesn't feel safe to you, it's responding to that relationship with an emotionally unavailable person, but it's actually their nervous system that's reacting to a relationship that does not feel safe. And when that's the case, when it's a response, that anxiousness is a response to a relationship trigger with someone who may actually be emotionally unavailable, then the anxiousness that you are expressing in those situations is actually just a relational response. And I want you to understand that being anxiously attached and having an anxious response to a partner who isn't giving you much to work with, those are 2 vastly different things. So let me try to break it down just a little bit more for you. Real anxious attachment, the kind that I would say is clinically diagnosable, even though anxious attachment isn't really a clinical diagnosis. But real anxious attachment usually comes from early childhood experiences where love for you, it felt inconsistent. And what I mean by that is that sometimes love was there, it was given to you, and then sometimes that love wasn't given to you. And sometimes you had to work really hard to just feel chosen by your caregiver, or to earn affection, or to earn safety, or to earn love from your caregiver. And where sometimes your caregivers, they were warm and they were available to you. And then on the other hand, sometimes they were absent or unpredictable in a way where you didn't know what you were going to get with them. And when stuff like this happens, this inconsistent type of love happens when you are a child, something important is learned in those moments. You learn to stay alert or to stay vigilant. You learn that you can't just relax. You learn that love, it can just easily disappear. You learn that love isn't reliable. And when that is the case, as an adult, it shows up in relationships as things like you overthinking everything, you reading into tone changes, you needing constant reassurance from your partner, you feeling anxious when there's distance. And all of those feelings, all of that is totally valid. It's understandable. And I see it all the time, every day. Because no matter what, when you grow up in an environment where love is inconsistent, it will have a ripple effect on your life. It will, and it does. And one of those major results is anxious attachment. So yes, I do believe in anxious attachment. It's there, it's real, I see it all the time. But here's the part that a lot of people forget about when they talk about anxious attachment or when they label someone as anxiously attached. The part that they forget is that you can take a person who is secure, someone who I would say is pretty dang emotionally stable, and you could take that person and you could put them in a relationship with someone who is inconsistent, who is emotionally unavailable, who is hot one minute and cold the next minute, who is hard to read, who is giving them real legitimate reasons to actually feel anxious in a relationship. And when you do that, that secure person's nervous system, it will start to look anxious. How could it not? It doesn't know what it's going to get. It's unpredictability. And that's not because they are anxious or because they are anxiously attached, but it's because their body is trying to make sense of the instability and the unpredictability that they are getting from their partner. And that's not dysfunction on the secure partner turned anxious end. That's them learning to adapt to the partnership that they are in. Their nervous system will start looking anxiously attached because that is what nervous systems do. They respond to the environment that they are placed in. And when this happens, this is what I call nervous system mismatch. This is not really about your attachment style, but what you're seeing here is two systems that do not create safety together. And when you're in a relationship with someone, your nervous system doesn't just operate in isolation, meaning that your nervous system constantly reads your partner's emotions. It constantly reads their behaviors, which directly impacts your sense of safety, your stress levels, and your emotional stability, rather than your nervous system just functioning independently like it does when you're not in a relationship. When you are in a relationship, your nervous system is always in constant dialogue with the nervous system of your partners. So for example, if your partner, if they're a pretty regulated person, then you might find yourself being able to regulate. But if your partner is continuously showing up in your relationship dysregulated or emotionally unavailable, then your nervous system, it works overtime trying to compensate for that. And when this is the case, it can feel like you're texting with your partner and you're waiting too long to reply, and you physically start to feel your chest just tighten. Or it can look like you trying to read your partner's mood the second that they walk into the room. It can almost feel like your world is just ending when there is space or disconnection between you and your partner. And that's because this relationship has wired you to believe that when there is space and distance in this relationship between you and your partner, then that means something is wrong, because usually something is wrong. So basically, when this is the case, when this happens, your nervous system, it just constantly asks and scans for things like, am I emotionally safe in this relationship right now or not? And if the answer keeps changing from yes, no, maybe so, then you and your nervous system will start changing too. Because your nervous system will start wiring itself to that constant instability or emotional unavailability. And the problem here, the real problem here, is that people end up staying in these type of relationships when they know that this isn't good for me, this is bad for me. And then they start to internally label or identify themselves as an anxious person or as the problem, as the fact that they are probably just too much, that they're just too needy, that they're just too anxiously attached. Because that's what TikTok has told them, or that's because the relationship or their partner has made them feel this way. So then they start to believe it. But in all actuality, when you're in this type of relationship, faced with this type of relationship triggers, this instability and inconsistency, or this emotional unavailability, then the anxiety that you start to exhibit isn't solely coming from you. It's being activated by these specific identifiable patterns, like the emotional unavailability or the inconsistency in your partner's behavior. So you are being wired or conditioned from your relationship dynamic. And that right there, that is not the same as being an anxious attached person or having an anxious attachment style. That difference between the two, being wired to be anxious or being anxiously attached, that difference right there, those two things matter. The difference between the two matter. So you may be asking yourself, how do I actually know if I am anxiously attached or if I'm just anxious because of my relationship? How do I know if I've always been this way and this is a line that traveled with me across several relationships, or is this just from this isolated event, just from this relationship that I am currently in? Well, let me give you these 3 things that I look at with clients to help them tell the difference between the two. Thing number 1 is what I call the pattern check. So you want to stop and you want to ask yourself, do I feel like this anxious in every relationship that I've ever been in, or is it just this one? Because true anxious attachment, like I said, it tends to follow you everywhere you go in every relationship that you are in, with every partner that you've had. You bring that anxious attachment with you in every relationship that you enter into. But if you've had relationships where you felt calm, where you felt secure, and you felt like yourself, where you didn't have to constantly monitor and check, where you didn't have to constantly seek reassurance, then that right there, that matters. Because that right there, that tells you that this might not be you or your attachment style. This might be the dynamic of the relationship that you are in. Thing number 2 is what I call the regulation check. So when your partner reassures you, does that reassurance actually feel calming to you? Like, now I can breathe. Or does it feel like this is only temporary? Maybe it feels confusing. Maybe it just feels inconsistent, where it only lasts for a few hours and you're like, oh, thanks, but I know that's not going to last. Because if someone's words, so them saying things to reassure you, don't match their behavior, so them actually not following through on what they are saying, then your nervous system, it won't settle on that and it won't remain calm because the threat is still real. And when that type of threat is so active and still real, there's no amount of reassurance that will calm that. And that's not because you don't want it to. That's not because you're broken. And that's not because you're too much. But it's because your nervous system is picking up on something that's real. And it's picking up on the fact that I know that this won't last and it's just temporary. And then thing number 3 is the away from them test, okay? And this one, it hits a little bit harder here. So how do you feel when you are not around them? And I don't mean that, oh man, I just really miss them. I'm just missing my partner because they're not here. I'm saying, how do you feel, just you by yourself, when you are alone with yourself? When this is the case, do you feel more calm when you're away from them? Do you feel a sense of relief when you're away from them? Do you feel more clear-headed when you're away from them? Do you feel more like you again when you're away from them? Because this away from them test is the one that really gets people. Because if you feel better away from the relationship than when you're actually in the relationship, then that right there, that's not anxious attachment. That's your nervous system finally getting a break. Because when people are actually anxiously attached, they tend to feel worse when they are by themselves, when they are away from their partner. Because when they are away from the person that they are particularly intimately attached to, it increases their anxiety when they're anxiously attached. And I've even had clients tell me that they actually feel fine or they actually feel better when their partners are traveling or away. And then as soon as their partners come back and return, they instantly feel dysregulated. And if this is the case, if this is you, then that pattern of dysregulation that you're feeling, it's telling you something. It's telling you that the relationship itself is the problem. Not that you're anxiously attached, but that the relationship that you are in is activating you and triggering you, and it is causing you to be dysregulated. And I know all of this can be hard to hear, especially when you're in love with someone. And I know sometimes it's actually easier to believe that I am the problem, because if it's you, then it's in your control more, then you can fix it. But if it's the relationship, then you have to face it and ask even harder questions. And you have to confront some things when it's the relationship. And I tell my clients this all of the time. It's extremely difficult, almost impossible, to heal anxiety in an environment that keeps creating the anxiety. That's like you trying to calm your body down while the alarm is still going off. And at some point, you have to take a step back and you have to look at the environment, not just the person inside of the environment. So I want you to hear this clearly. Yes, anxious attachment is very real, but you are not automatically anxiously attached or anxious just because you feel anxious in a relationship. You might just be someone whose nervous system is doing exactly what it's supposed to do. Maybe it's just the fact that your nervous system is trying to tell you that this relationship doesn't feel safe. And that signal that your nervous system is giving you, it deserves your attention, not your shame, not your dismissal. It deserves your attention, because you do not deserve to continue to be in a relationship that triggers you and that causes you to have relational anxiety that's detrimental to you, especially if you are working so hard on yourself and you're going to therapy and you're doing all these things to try to change and to better yourself. And if you're doing all these things and nothing's still changing and you're still entering this relationship and it's still difficult and it's still hard and you're still reacting this way and you're still anxious, that might mean the source of the pain and the anxiety that you're feeling isn't coming from you. That maybe, just maybe, it's not a you problem. So try to take a step back. Listen to what your body is telling you. And if this hit you hard, I want you to tell me in the comments. Try doing that, taking a step back and evaluating and asking yourself the 3 things that help you know the difference between if this is actually me having an anxious attachment style, or is this anxiety that I'm having a result of the relationship dynamic that I am in. So maybe comment below, was it you or was it the relationship dynamic? Let us know. Because really figuring out that moment of clarity, that truth, that right there is where everything starts to change. And if you know someone who's been told that they're too much, then send them this video, because they might not be too much. They might just be in the wrong environment. So thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and comment, and I'll catch you on the next video.